There was an insane 486 potential commanders printed in the year of 2024. 306 of those are brand new, making it nearly impossible to build a deck around each and every one of them, which leads to overstimulation or decision paralysis for players looking to explore new commanders. So let's cut this epic down to a short story. That begs the question, what are the top 10 commanders of the year? This list isn't based off of CEDH, but more so who is the funnest commander to play. We're mostly casual players here, so we want to put up a good fight, but have fun and potentially do some dumb shit that our table will either love or inevitably hate. Making this top 10 commander list requires a lot of paring down, and sometimes you can't pare things down perfectly. So, before we get into the meat and potatoes, here are some honorable mentions that deserve to have their name represented for the things they've done this year. Ilyuj is an honorable mention for this year, mostly for the amount of angry people that were in my comment section for this one short. Alright, listen here, you blue players. Destroying lands is one thing. At least I can kind of recur them. Or destroying my artifacts. I can bring those back too. But if you turn them into the most worthless color in Magic the Gathering, I'm going to do everything in my power to take this silly little fish guy out. Regardless, this commander can be a powerhouse. Either you're going for the island walk strategy or extra turns. Free spells are always welcome in commander. Number 2 was Obeka, who was a very hyped commander when OTJ was first spoiled, and the internet took her and ran with her. She enables some very key and powerful abilities to trigger multiple times a turn, like quartz or initiative effects. It's very fun and unique to play, so I'm hoping in the upcoming sets she gets some new tech just to make her even more fun. And taking that number 1 honorable mention spot is Flubs. I did not understand the hype around this commander when it first dropped. A 0/5 that lets you discard cards and play extra lands, what's the big deal? I was very wrong. Once I saw this deck in action and witnessed the 20-minute turns that were produced from this deck, I realized one thing. This frog can either hop or completely flop. But when this deck does work, you will witness the most interactive Thassa win of your life, or get eaten alive by squirrels. It took me hours of internal fighting to rank each of these commanders. All of them stand out in their own right, and there are arguments to move a card here over this card, yada yada yada. If you disagree with anything that I have said, please let me know in the comment section. So without further ado, let's dive right into this list. Glarb is probably my most featured commander of this year. If you have watched any of our community commander live streams, you will have seen a couple iterations of this guy. Normally, Glarb is built around taking advantage of casting spells that cost 4 or more mana but offer alternate casting costs like Evoke or using conditions bouncing lands back to your hand. This enables you to dump cards fast, dig into your library, and find Doomsday or Jace for your win con, or toss a Thassa's in there, whichever you want to do. I find that boring. My preferred method is Mutate. You can cast Mutate cards off the top of your library, often for cheaper than the actual card cost. Mutate onto something obscenely large or unblockable creature, and you can swing your way to victory. As much as I wish it was that easy to get this deck rolling, tossing in a couple cards to reduce casting costs so you can cheap out cards on the top of your library, digging even deeper, and getting as many Mutate triggers as possible. But this normally is pretty expensive, so I've added a couple ways to drop additional lands per turn so we can fuel our madness just a little bit more. This creates a very hit or miss type situation, but it's much more fun to navigate than that ultra deterministic type of play. This commander is crazily suppressive. The precon out of the box is very powerful and can sit down with some stronger custom built decks without even batting an eye. But when you start tuning him up, adding cards with built-in cost reduction like Blast Act, Shadows of Mortality, or Blood for the Blood God, you can start maximizing damage utilization with the least amount of resources possible. Shadow of Mortality seems like a stretch sometimes, but I wouldn't worry too much. You will lose that life. The second you say that this is your commander, you are now the threat. Just as Krim. Since it's Rakdos, obviously we're going to be playing cards that will ping our opponents for doing normal game actions. To rub that last little bit of salt into their wounds, we're going to run Sulfin Mayhem Dominus or other damage doublers, maybe even triplers, because why not speed up the game even more? Lord of Pain has become my go-to for whenever someone asks for a quick game, since it starts the doomsday clock the second it hits the board. Either all three will band together and try and take me out, resulting in some fast damage on every player, bringing down life totals, so when I eventually do get knocked out, I don't have to wait long for a new game, or I ensure the game is over before the store closes. As a longtime Don Andreas player, I think I found his replacement. With a number of sets that have featured both assassins and pirates over the last year, there is no shortage of creatures that offer additional payoffs for attacking, since Edwards rewards you for turning your cards sideways, and to this day, the best way to do that is to attack your opponents, or to crew your vehicles so they can attack your opponents. While this deck will feature most of the currently notable vehicles like Smuggler, Copter, or Reaver's Titan, but in a very short while, we will have a whole set to boost this guy up even more come 2025. Aether Drift will feature a bunch of new vehicles that could run really nicely in this deck, plus your commander for one additional mana is more of an onboard threat. A 5/5 is much harder to swing into or defend against versus at 4/3. Assassin's Creed got a lot of flack for being an Aftermath redo, and I was definitely a part of that crowd. But I will say, there are some solid cards in this set. It is just a shame that this IP was featured in this type of setting. While Ivy is selfish and creates copies for herself, Arna is a commander of the people. She doubles counters and then creates copies of auras and attachments attached to all modified creatures. That means every modular creature gets bigger each turn, with the added bonus that if that creature is removed, you get to take those counters and move them over to another creature, maintaining your threat level. Now, counters are great and all, but what about multiple copies of Colossus Hammer? If you have it equipped and declare a modified creature attacking, you now have 2 Colossal Hammers. And a creature with a +20/+20 is a pretty lethal threat, especially if it's your commander. This is straight up Voltron, and it's amazing. Run some extra mana rocks as artifacts matter in this deck, throw in some cheap, fun enchantments or equipments, and you're off to the races. This commander is easily built as a budget deck, but as always, scales quickly with bigger and badder threats. I do wish that she had red in her color identity for obvious reasons. When I first read this card, the immediate thought that popped into my brain was, why isn't this card in red? A very common thought, apparently, because my gruel brain went straight to Jessica's Will and a plethora of other red exile cards. But what my pea-sized brain failed to notice is there are a bunch of ways to trigger this guy other than just straight up exiling them. Cascade, Discover, Foretell, Plot, Suspend. Utilizing all of these allows you to drop multiple big spells in a turn, like off of Apex Devastator or mana ramping in the early game. But with so many ways to play so many spells, keeping your hand full is very important. Well, it's important in every commander deck, but with this guy it's especially important. While your commander allows you to drop cards from your hand, there's no native way to refill your hand, and this bottleneck can be overcome with the handy dandy blue pip, since blue draws way too many damn cards in the first place. One restriction to note is that the cards cast from your hand have to be a permanent spell, which is nice, so you're not going to get any free extra turn spells, but in this case, you could just do it the other way around. And we're back with another commander that wants to resolve spells not from your hand. Crewclaw is a very powerful commander and has risen in the ranks, taking the 12th most popular Rakdos commander, even though it was printed not too long ago. Pair him with some unblockable effects and load up the deck with some terrible threats, and your opponents will be having a crisis each and every single time you swing. You don't even need to spend a lot of money on this deck. Any big attackers like Ashen Monstrosity or Bog Stompers to really expensive big payoffs like Army of the Dead works well in this deck. I've even considered a Madness version of this guy, or at least sprinkling in a few Madness cards as discard fodder to cheap out other effects. And on that note, this guy would make a very good backup commander to Angie. While you can get creative about what goes in this deck, I know each and every one of you are just going to put Eldrazi and Blightsteel Colossus. That's fine, do as you please. Just don't do what Veggie Wagon suggested. You might lose some friends. This deck is going to convert so many people into playing Magic the Gathering. Like, I don't know if you guys are prepared for this. It's a raccoon, and it says make trash, do smash. There's going to be so many people that start playing just for this deck. One of those people are probably going to be my girlfriend, purely for the fact that the commander's a raccoon.
Be prepared.
He made such a big impact that he made the top 10 list. The precon of this guy is super fun, but as you start looking at all the big, dumb, gruel enchantments or artifacts you have access to, he just becomes a powerhouse. The fact that enchantments and artifacts are indestructible means you really have no reason not to swing. Plus, why would it matter to you if your unnatural growth is tapped? It's not like it had other abilities that you could use on it anyway. Playing this deck makes it so your opponents really have to wait to interact with you on your turn, since a large portion of removal is creature removal, making sorcery removal less effective as they aren't creatures on your opponent's turn. Plus, enchantment removal is becoming rarer to see in decks as efficient creature removal takes the limelight. Now, before you run to the comments and say you should be running all forms of removal, not just creature, I agree with you. I see why some would opt to run mostly creature removal, as a lot of scary effects are now being printed onto some pretty bad creatures. This bunny appears to be kind and gentle, but is built like an absolute unit. The constant stream of +1/+1 counters, on top of the additional flying effect until end of turn, creates instant threats. Running a bunch of cheap and easy instant spells that you can stack in each of your opponent's turns, toss in a few payoffs like drawing your second card per turn, counters matter, or combat triggers, and theoretically in one turn cycle, you could be 3 counters bigger and 6 card richer at the bare minimum. This is the same concept of Maraska, just in a different approach. Instead of trying to draw 2 cards in each of your opponent's turn, you're trying to control and accelerate your gameplay by playing instances to use the first resolution as a political favor, and spell 2 to refill your hand. This deck is very much going to run better the more money you spend on it, as is relying on cheap and free spells and gracious amounts of mana, and as we know, that costs a pretty penny in Magic the Gathering, but a very fun and powerful commander nonetheless. And on a real note, if it's good enough for Josh Lee Kwai, then it's more than good enough for me. Oh lord, there is an Izzet commander on this list, and I'm a very outspoken hater of Izzet on this channel. And to put an Izzet commander this high up should speak volumes about the commander itself. Bria here lets me play my aggressive playlines I enjoy, but combo them a little differently with a different set of creatures. Giving all creature prowess on top of being able to make a creature unblockable is quite fun. This deck makes great use of cantrips and free spells, allowing you to spin up large creatures and swing for solid unblockable damage. I personally like to do more of a burn and swing strat, which allows me to spend mana on burning down boards and swinging in for more damage with prowess. Is it the most effective way of doing it? No. Is it fun? Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I do this is because I don't like being reliant on counterspells. I do run a couple, yes, but I like being more proactive in removal instead of waiting for a spell-worthy spell to counter. Drumroll, please. And who do we have taking the number 1 spot for 2024? That is Marchesa, Dealer of Death. I first fell in love with this commander at Commander Sealed, all because I was able to take some non-assuming bulk cards and turn them into value quickly. It was an overly expensive burn spell? Cool. I have card advantage now. It was after Commander Sealed I looked into building this deck and finding more fun and constant ways to cause crimes. Thanks to OGJ, other creatures with crimes, payoffs were printed, and multiple payoffs for one action is amazing. This piles on top of the other spell slinger payoffs that keep you protected and fuel further shenanigans. There are also options for on-demand crimes like Glasses of Urza or Codex Shredder. This allows you to dig deeper into your library to look for those answers when you need to. And as an added bonus, a lot of the crime committers are in Rakdos, which fits very nicely up my alley, meaning we can still swing for some decent damage. Through the course of this year, there has been one thing that I learned about myself, and I'm starting to like blue more and more, and I'm terrified of this evolution. I feel like it's more of a regression, but nonetheless, evolution. If you're curious to see any of these decks in action, head over to the live stream playlist that we have. Go check out some previous broadcasts so you can see what we came up with and the shenanigans that we pulled. If you're looking just to see some pack openings, I got sections for that too. Head over to here and check out those videos. Anything for 2025, I already have plans to open all of the sets prior to release. So hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on those. And on that note, Deck Dojo out.